Hello, my name is Bobby Gagda. I'm in group 4 with my partner Siddharth. For our data set, we were using true and false news. And we got this from the internet, from the site that you recommended us to do. And we have 5 different columns for this data set. We have the title of the news articles, the text under them, the subject of the news article, the date it was published, and the status. Before this, we only had 2 spreadsheets for all the true and the false, but we put everything in one spreadsheet so that we could use only one spreadsheet to load all our data. And we went ahead and gave it true for all the true and false for all the false. So if we go down here, we can see it changes to false. And we did this so that it's easier for us to only load one set of data into our program. And for our program, this is our main script. We had 2 different functions for each one of us. For the main script, we use our first line, we use XLS read instead of read table because it wasn't giving us any errors and it was easier for us to do so. So we use that to load everything under the column E and from the rows 2 to 44,920. So it would read the whole column from that spreadsheet. And we did the same thing for our subject right here. We added that not kind of syntax so that it wouldn't read any of the numbers or any of that before it because we didn't have any numbers and our integers in our spreadsheet. We only had strings. So we used that to help it do so and read everything that's under subject, that column, which was C. And after that, we had a list of if they wanted to see more stuff about real or fake news, or they wanted to play the guessing game. So we had a list, drop down list for that. And then we stored it into row 1, column 1, so that it could help us use the switch case for that. And for a switch case, for our case 1, if they picked graphs, they had another list of if they picked real or fake news, they would, for that first case, it would list down graphs or news type selection. And that would be stored into row 2 and column 2. So if our row 2, which was our graphs right here, if that equal to 1, so if they pick graphs, if the user picked graphs, it would run all the code that's under this if statement. And under this if statement, what this code does is we initialize all our variables that would store all our values from each count. And what it does is counts the amount of news articles in each news type. So we have politics news, world news. So it would count each one, count how many news articles are under each subject. And for that, we use our for statement. And what this for statement does is it counts the number of elements from 1 till the number of elements under subject. And it'll keep looking through that to see what the user wants. So for example, here we have an if statement, the string compares subject to politics news. So if they see the word politics news under the column subject, it's going to compare the strings and it's going to say, oh, okay, so it's the same word they see under that subject, politics news. And how many of those they see, they start counting. That's why we have our variable. And count pn plus 1, what it does is it keeps counting them until this statement is false. So then it would keep going to the next one. So if it doesn't see politics news and it says world news, it's going to store everything, all the number of articles into count wn. And that's what this for loop does, that 1 to the number of elements under subject. And that's what the string compare does. It just compares strings under subject, which is our politics news, world news, and news. And we did the same thing for our 8 cases and stored them into that variable. Then we end our if statement right here and our for loop right here. And then we start creating our graphs after this. So before we're doing that, we had 2 types of politics news. So we had politics news for the true and the fake, and we combined them into one politics news so that we could use it more appropriately for our graphs. And the reason why we had the variables f1 for each figure is so that each figure or each graph would load into a new window. So we used f1 equals a figure, f2 equals a figure. And then for figures, we first had the scatter graph. And for that, for our y values, we used the count pn, which is the amount of politics news, world news that we calculated from here, and we gave the X values their labels of, so this is politics news, this is world news, and we label that as figure 1. So this would be our first figure that would show up. And this would be a scatter graph. So we just use scatter, and that's our X values, which is that, our labels, and the Y values, which we calculated from here. We did the same thing for our bar graphs, and we had the title for it, and we used the same data set for that. And after that, for our pie chart, we want to differentiate between how many true and how many false news are there. So we use the same thing like we did for counting each one of the news types that we had. And to count true and count false, it would count how many of true and how many of false. We use the same kind of layout as we did for the other one. And instead of comparing strings, we had it as comparing the logical, the logic of it. So instead of comparing strings, we had the integers. So if it was 1, it would count as true. And if it was 0, it would count as false. So it was the same thing, except for we had 2 different variables for count true and false for it. And we created our pie chart after that, gave it a label, and then figure 3. So this would be our third figure. So we had first, second figure, third figure, and the title for it. After this, we had one more scatter plot with a fitted line on it. So it was the same thing for the scatter like we did before, except for the X values would be 1 to 6, which is the amount of news types that we had. And these are the news types we used for the scatter plot. And we use subplot so that we could display the scatter plot with the fitted line on one window. And that's why we have the subplot 1 to 1, and this would be under figure 4. We kept the grid on so you can see the grid lines, the X and Y label, and the title for it. For the fitted line, we did the order of 1, and we used polyfit to and line space and polyval to calculate our fitted line. And we put that under subplot 1 to 2, which is our it's going to be under the same figure, but this would be our first picture or a graph, and this would be our second chart. And we plotted it right here. And else is for the if statement that we had right here. The if row 1 equals 2, which is if they pick graphs. If not, it would go to news type selection. So we have our else statement here. So else, it would go into this function that we have for news type selection. We'll go through that in a second, and that's the input for it. And for our case 2, this was our case 1. If they pick news or fake news type selection type, or if they select the guessing game, it will go into our case 2, which will go into this function we called it, and those are inputs. Go into the news type selection function. Here we have the name of it, the outputs of it. We read the table, we created variables and stored information to it. And we just initialize variables and start storing stuff in it, like the columns and the title and all of that stuff in there. And similarly, we created the list for each type of news type. And we had the same kind of layout in each one of our main script and our function. For our switch case, we use row 3. And for our case 1, while our N was true, which was the first case, which was politics, if that was true, if they picked that, would string compare for politics news under subject, and it would display each title under those, and fprint, we use fprintf to display those titles. So it would string compare if they have politics news on the subject. It would store all of those titles under that into N, and it would into M, and it would display all of that right here. And then we did the same thing for all the rest of them, for the rest of the 8 cases that we had, 8 cases right here. And that's it for this function. For the guessing game function, we used, what we wanted to do is ask the user to guess if the title of the news article was true or fake. And to do that, we did the same thing, created a function with the output and the input that we have here, named it, read the table, stored the data into variables like the titles, true or false, and we used that so that we could use the while loop. And for the while loop, as long as it's Y, which is as long as they say yes, they want to keep playing, it's going to keep going into this while loop, and it's going to randomize any n value, which is any row from 1 to 4,920, and it's going to display the title for that row randomly, and it's going to ask the user if the above heading that we displayed here is true or false. If it's true, it's going to fprintf congratulations, and do you want to play again? If not, which is else, it would say wrong. So it would keep going again and again. If you keep hitting next, it's going to ask you again if do you want to play? Yes. If not, then it's going to say thanks for playing, and it's going to kick you out of the function. So let's run it and see how this program works. So in the workspace, we should see all our calculations for all our accounts that we had. If we selected the first thing, which is our real or fake news and graphs. Sorry, this laptop takes too long, but select that. And if we select graphs, it's going to show us 4 graphs, and it's going to show you all your calculated values in our workspace. And it's going to show our fourth, which is a scatter with the fitted line first, that we have that, fake news, and that was how much fake news, the amount of news articles they are under this type of news, and we can see that it's an increasing trend line, and we drew a fitted line for that. And then, sorry, I just deleted the pie chart, but that was the pie chart that we saw over there for the true and the fake. And we have the bar chart, we already went through this. And this is the scatter plot that we have for each kinds of news and how many of them are there. Then let's run it again. And as we can see, we see all the calculated values under the workspace. Then we can go to the guessing game. It's going to get you there. This certainly doesn't do exactly what we wanted it to do, but it's going to ask you this question first. And once you hit something, it does what we actually wanted it to do, which is guess if the above news heading is true or false. So it shows up any randomized news heading. If you say, okay, I think it's true, it's going to compare it. And if it is true, it's going to say, congratulations, you're going to play again. If you say yes, it's going to go ahead and do that. If you think this is false, go ahead and do that. If it wasn't, it would say, well, we told you to say here, which is you guessed wrong, and it would ask you, do you want to play again? If you hit no, it's going to kick you out and you're out of the program. And let's run it one more time for the last case. Okay, there. Use that selection. This gave us an error. I don't know why it gives us this error, but if we do run the function itself, this is what we would want it to do. We didn't have enough time, so we couldn't fix that. But once we run it, it should show a table, like we said right here, of these 8 different things. And whatever you pick, let's just say you pick politics, it should show you all the headings under all the news titles under politics news. And that's what we wanted to do. I guess we answered all the questions except for that running. I feel like we did a good job, and we answered all the questions we wanted to answer. And yeah, that's it. Thank you so much.